In a world built on ambition and greed, our story begins not with a bang, but with a whisper of betrayal forged in silver. We uncover a hidden chapter in financial history, a story of power, manipulation, and a lesson the world refused to learn. From the marble halls of the Roman Senate to the digital ledgers of modern central banks, this narrative explores the rise, the fall, and the silent consequences that changed how money moves. Every moment builds towards revelation. How decisions made in pursuit of imperial glory reshaped economies, shattered societies, and redefined the very meaning of value itself. As the truth unfolds, one question remains: did Rome master its money, or did its money master Rome? The Roman denarius was more than a coin. It was a promise, struck in nearly pure silver, a symbol of an empire's strength and integrity. Each piece carried the weight of Roman honor, a tangible representation of trust that fueled commerce from the misty shores of Britannia to the sun-scorched deserts of Syria. Merchants accepted it without hesitation, soldiers were paid in it, and citizens stored their life's work in its dense metallic form. For centuries, this small silver disk was the bedrock of the known world's economy. It was the physical manifestation of Roman power, a guarantee that the value you held today would be the same tomorrow. This trust, more than legions or aqueducts, was the true foundation of the empire. But foundations, whether of stone or of faith, can be eroded from within. The first crack appeared not on a battlefield, but in the quiet, shadowed mints of the empire. Rome was a machine that ran on conquest and coin. But as the empire's borders ceased to expand, the flow of new silver from plundered lands slowed to a trickle. Yet the demands on the state only grew. Endless wars on the frontiers, elaborate public works to appease the masses, and the insatiable greed of a sprawling bureaucracy required a river of funding the treasury no longer possessed. Faced with this impossible equation, Emperor Nero made a fateful secret decision in 64 AD. He ordered the mints to do something unthinkable, to reduce the silver content of the denarius, mixing it with cheaper base metals like copper. It was a subtle theft, invisible to the naked eye. The coin looked the same, felt nearly the same, and still bore the emperor's seal, but the promise was broken. This act of currency debasement was the state's dark secret, a solution born of political expediency and a quiet contempt for the public's trust. By melting down 3 pure silver coins and adding copper, the mints could produce 4 new coins of the same face value. It was alchemy in reverse, turning silver into a tool of deception. This allowed the government to meet its immediate obligations, to pay the legions, fund grain doles, and finance grand monuments. In the short term, it seemed like a stroke of genius. Rome could spend money it did not truly have. But this was not wealth creation, it was wealth dilution. Each new, lighter coin that entered circulation devalued every other coin already in existence. The empire had begun to systematically, secretly, rob its own people. It was a slow poison injected directly into the veins of the economy. The consequences did not manifest overnight. At first, only the most astute money changers, weighing the coins, noticed the discrepancy. But soon, the market itself, an unforgiving judge of value, began to react. As more and more debased coins flooded the system, people instinctively understood they were being cheated. A merchant selling grain would demand more of the new, lighter denarii to equal the value of the old, heavier ones. Prices began to creep upward. This was the birth of Roman inflation. What once cost 1 denarius now cost 2, then 5, then 10. The state, trapped in a cycle of its own making, responded not by restoring the currency, but by accelerating its debasement. Successive emperors, each facing their own crises, pushed the silver content lower and lower. By the middle of the 3rd century, the denarius, once a symbol of purity, was little more than a copper coin with a thin silver wash. The secret was out, and the trust that had held the empire together was evaporating. The economic decay soon metastasized into social chaos. The inflation was a brutal, regressive tax on the common citizen. A soldier's fixed salary, once enough to support a family, became worthless. A farmer's life savings, stored in what he thought was sound money, turned to dust. The middle class, the backbone of Roman society, was systematically wiped out. People lost faith not just in the currency, but in the government that issued it. Why work, save, or invest when the value of your labor could be stolen by the state overnight? Hoarding of old, pure silver coins became rampant, while the debased currency circulated with increasing velocity, as people tried to spend it before it lost more value. This phenomenon, where bad money drives out good, is a law of economics as immutable as gravity. The social contract was broken. As the monetary system disintegrated, so did the fabric of Roman civilization. Long-distance trade, which relied on a stable and trustworthy medium of exchange, ground to a halt. A merchant in Alexandria had no incentive to ship goods to Rome in exchange for worthless coins. The vast, integrated economy of the Mediterranean shattered into 1,000 isolated, local fragments. Barter replaced commerce. Communities retreated into self-sufficiency. The great Roman roads, once arteries of trade, fell into disuse, traveled only by desperate armies. This economic collapse fueled political instability, leading to an almost continuous cycle of civil wars. Ambitious generals, unable to pay their troops with worthless currency, would march on Rome to seize power and the mints, only to repeat the same disastrous policies as their predecessors. The empire began to eat itself alive. The final stage of this internal collapse was the rise of a new social order, feudalism. As the central authority in Rome became irrelevant, wealthy landowners retreated to their fortified country estates or villas. They became the new power centers. Unable to rely on the state for security or a functioning economy, they created their own private armies and self-sufficient domains. Peasants and small farmers, bankrupted by inflation and seeking protection from roving bandits and tax collectors, gave up their freedom and their land in exchange for security. They became serfs, tied to the land of a local lord. The sophisticated, urbanized, and interconnected world of the Roman Empire dissolved, replaced by a decentralized, agrarian, and hierarchical system. The collapse was not the result of a single, decisive battle against foreign invaders. It was a long, slow, internal disintegration brought on by the destruction of a single, vital concept: trust in money. 14 centuries later, we stand in a world that believes it has moved beyond such primitive mistakes. Our money is no longer metal, but digital entries on a ledger, a sophisticated system of global finance managed by powerful central banks. We call it fiat money, currency backed not by a physical commodity like silver or gold, but by government decree and the full faith and credit of the state. We have been told this is progress a more flexible and enlightened system that allows for precise management of the economy, the smoothing of business cycles, and the funding of public needs, without the rigid constraints of a metallic standard. But when we strip away the complex terminology and the digital veneer, the fundamental principle remains dangerously, hauntingly familiar. We have, once again, placed our absolute trust in the promise of the state. Today, when a government needs to fund wars, social programs, or bailouts for failing institutions, it does not need to secretly shave silver from a coin. The tools are far more powerful and far less transparent. Through a process often called quantitative easing, a central bank can create new money digitally with a few keystrokes. This new liquidity is injected into the financial system, allowing the government to finance its deficits by issuing bonds that are then purchased with this newly created currency. It is the modern equivalent of Nero's debasement, executed on a scale the Roman emperors could only have dreamed of. It is a hidden tax, a dilution of the value of every dollar, euro, or yen already in existence. The mechanism has changed, but the outcome is identical. The state is spending money it does not have, and the purchasing power of the public savings is silently eroded. The parallels are not merely academic. They are unfolding in real time. We see the symptoms Rome knew all too well. We see persistent and accelerating price inflation, not just in consumer goods, but in assets like stocks, real estate, and cryptocurrencies as people flee a devaluing currency in search of a store of value. We see a widening gap between the rich and the poor as those closest to the monetary spigot, the financial institutions and the already wealthy, benefit first from the new money, while wage earners and savers watch the value of their labor and savings diminish. We see a loss of faith in institutions, a growing political polarization, and a sense of systemic fragility. The very trust that underpins our global financial order is being tested. The lesson from Rome's fall is not an argument against paper money or for a return to a metallic standard. It is a timeless and urgent warning about human nature and the temptations of power. The story of the denarius reveals a fundamental truth. Any monetary system, no matter how technologically advanced, is only as strong as the trust upon which it is built. When a state, whether an ancient empire or a modern republic, prioritizes short-term political expediency over the long-term integrity of its currency, it plants the seeds of its own destruction. Rome's mistake was not metallurgical, it was moral. It was the belief that power could override principles, that the promise of value could be broken without consequence. We are living in a grand monetary experiment, a global repeat of Rome's folly, but with far more complex tools and on a scale that encompasses the entire planet. The architects of our modern system have assured us that this time is different, that they possess the wisdom and the instruments to manage what the Romans could not. But the echoes of history are growing louder. The slow erosion of trust, the subtle debasement of value, the widening social fractures, these are not new phenomena. They are the predictable consequences of betraying the fundamental promise of money. The fall of Rome teaches us that empires do not collapse overnight. They crumble from within, slowly, as the faith that binds them together is methodically destroyed. And the ultimate question for our time is whether we will heed this 1,700-year-old warning, or whether we are destined to learn, once again, that no empire can long survive the debasement of its own currency and the destruction of its own trust.